All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're dialing in from. We'll give it another like 30 seconds or so before we get started. And while we're waiting for more people to join, thought I'd throw a fun poll on stage. So this question, just to kick us off, is where does the best pizza in the world come from? Wow, someone was quick to say pizza is gross. I don't know who that was. New York. One of our speakers mentioned that Chicago was going to be a for sure winner, but looks like New York is first. Very nice. Best place isn't listed. I'm curious to hear in the chat where that place is. Awesome. Well, my name is Brandon. I lead the marketing team here at Runway. And exciting stuff because this is our very first webinar that you all are being a part of. And so we've got an exciting session today on the evolution of spreadsheets. And I got to say, when we were preparing the content for this session, I was just fascinated by how quickly the technology in this space in particular has been changing, but also just in the short amount of time that it has continued to evolve. And so really excited for the speakers and the content for the session. And just some housekeeping items before we actually kick it off. The session is recorded, so we will be sending the recording afterwards in case you want to go back and listen to it. And there will also be a section for Q&A after. So if you have questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat or use the Q&A panel, and we'll be sure to answer them at the end of this session. So with that, I'm going to bring on our first speaker, and that is Siqi Chen. Siqi is the founder and CEO of Runway. Hi, Siqi.
Hello, Brandon. This is exciting. I love hosting webinars. Webinars are my favorite thing. I love saying webinars all the time. But today we have someone really special, Paul Barnhurst, the one and only FP&A guy. And we thought we'd host a fun webinar with him to talk about the history of finance and tools. And it goes back, as you'll learn, quite a while. It didn't just start with a VisiCalc. So it's a really excited and fun history lesson here. And we'll also get into what's happening today. So you can draw a straight line back to apparently clay Sumerian tablets to what we're doing today. So Paul, please, it's all yours.
All right. Well, I thought I'd start by putting on this fancy jacket I got from Runway so everybody can see. I won't wear it outside today, but I'll wear it now so I can feel like I'm part of the flight crew. I believe that's what it is, right? It has a number on it. I'm number 199 of 200. I just made it. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. If you want to pull up the presentation. There we go. Perfect. All right. Let's start with, I'm guessing if I ask this question, how many of you use Excel or Google Sheets or something else? I bet we might get one person that says something else for their spreadsheet of choice. Now, if I ask if you have a planning tool, we probably get a few different answers. Many of you are curious to learn about Runway on that. So let's get started on the evolution of financial tools and spreadsheets. It's a fun story, but before we get there, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. So as was mentioned earlier, known as the FP&A Guy, I am big on training, sharing content, particularly podcasts. I have three. I have one on financial modeling called Financial Modeler's Corner, one that I host with Glenn Hopper called Future Finance, where we talk about AI and technology, and then another one called FP&A Tomorrow that focuses on where FP&A is going. So tools such as Runway and others, and how it's changing, business partnering, technology, all of that in FP&A Tomorrow. In addition to that, I was recently selected as a Microsoft MVP for the work I do around Excel. So that was a fun recognition I recently received. And so let's get started on financial tools, right? Back, thousands of years ago, right? They had to come up with a way to record what they had. So at the very beginning, you see things as simple as Sumerian clay tokens. And what's interesting is they started to draw lines on them, put circles in them to represent numbers, started putting them in envelopes, and using it as a representation for food storage. And that's where writing first came from, was derivative out of these clay tokens. The Incas took a totally different approach. You can see here they have these knotted tallies. So they had a chord system. All those different chords could have a certain number of knots and different colors to help represent numbers. The one I find interesting is the Chinese created the single entry. We all know double entry. We'll talk about that in a minute, but just try imagine doing your accounting with single entry. So you take a loan, all you record is the revenue. You don't record the liability, right? Or you pay back the loan, you don't decrease the loan. You're just saying, okay, $100 went out to pay for that loan I received. So it was very simple, and there was just a balance there. Add it all up, all your ins and your outs. Sometimes I wish it would be that simple for finance. But so that's kind of a little bit of where we really started way back when. Then we had what I'll call probably the biggest revolution in financial recording outside of the computer and technology like that, is the whole idea of double entry bookkeeping. It's been around almost 600 years, over 500 years. And it still remains the gold standard, right? Everybody, if I asked you guys out there, is anyone using something other than double entry to do their accounting? I'd be really concerned if you told me yes. There could be an auditor that will be looking for you soon, right? It's the gold standard. So out of double entry bookkeeping, we really started to see the use of different ledgers to record all those transactions. One of my memories of my mom as a kid is I can remember every month her sitting at our kitchen table, pulling out her bank checkbook, getting the bank statement and going one by one and reconciling and like, yep, okay, that check was cash, yep, that, and making sure her balance totaled to the bank balance. And if it didn't, she knew why, right? That's really where ledgers started. And you can see here a couple different examples. When you look at these ledgers, you'll notice they were a column and row format. That was ported over to the first spreadsheet, right? That's really the foundation of both paper ledgers and electronic spreadsheets. So what I want to show is even before spreadsheets, there were some people using computers to build 3-statement models. So I interviewed this gentleman. He's in his 80s now. His name's Colin Human. I interviewed him and a couple of other people on the history of financial modeling. And he's going to tell a story how in 1978, he coded a 3-statement model using punch cards. And so I'm going to go ahead and show this about a 2-minute clip, and then we'll talk about it when it's finished here.
It was 1978. And as I said, my dear lifelong friend, we're still pals. He's now 83, was the chap who introduced me to financial modeling. As Prem mentioned, Excel didn't exist in those days at all. Excel only came to South Africa in 1985. And Dave, like a magician, would ask me searching questions, and I would give him extensive answers, hopefully accurate. And we then produced this entire model, if you can believe it, Paul, on punch cards. You know, most people don't even know what a punch card is today. But we had this special machine, and he was typing away and punching holes in these cards. And they all, of course, had to be kept in a perfect sequence in a big tray. And we would go in the evening into the center of Johannesburg to one of the major banks. You can imagine what those computer rooms looked like in the days of old mainframes and all the rest of it, because we could rent time on their mainframe at a significantly reduced price after midnight. So we spent many hours in the computer room of this major bank running this model and had massive, great big printouts, you know. Sorry. Very, very bulky stuff. And amazingly, at the end of it, we then were called to do a presentation to the investment committee of this bank with whom we had applied for. And in total honesty, they just didn't believe us. They said to us, it's not possible. Nobody can do what you've done or claiming to be able to do what you're claiming to do. How do you know this is right? And I have to smile today when they talk about three-statement modeling. We were building three-statement models in 1978.
All right. So I hope you enjoyed that video a little bit. I mean, who could imagine?
It was 1970.
Who could imagine building your financial model with punch cards? Siqi, how would that be for you?
I don't know if I'm on stage, but
You are now. How would that be if you had to build your model using punch cards?
I would not be doing what I'm doing today. I will tell you that. That sounds not great.
Yeah, sounds incredibly painful, doesn't it? And so I thought I'd have a little fun and just ask you your thoughts on that. And I think it's a great story to just show how far we've come. Think, 1978, less than 50 years ago, someone built a three-statement model on punch cards. The next year, 1975, we had the launch of VisiCalc. Huge. First spreadsheet out there. Dan Bricklin had the idea as he's seeing his professor up on the board going, wouldn't it be great if we could show this on a computer? Then Microsoft got into the game, and surprisingly enough, their first attempt at a spreadsheet was not Excel. It was something called Multiplan that completely flopped. From there, you had Lotus 123, IBM launched Quattro Pro, then Excel came about in 1985. But what's interesting is it was originally launched for the Mac. I'm guessing if I ask how many prefer Excel on a Mac, if it's finance people in the audience, which is what I would expect, the answer is going to be close to zero, right? Almost everybody prefers Excel, but the original on Windows, but originally it was for the Mac. Then you see 1993, and I say this really revolutionized spreadsheets. VBA and macros came about. Then you had a few updates, but really it wasn't until 2006. You had some copycats and things that you had the next big change happen. And during this time, you had some planning tools come about, which we'll talk about. But the next big change in your spreadsheets is launch of Google Sheets. From there, you saw the launch of numbers on an iPad. About the same time, Excel launched 365, which really made a huge upgrade to spreadsheets because now instead of waiting 3 years in between releases, you saw constant updates, monthly channels being pushed, semi-annual. Like most software today, most planning software, you'll see updates on a monthly or quarterly basis. You saw Airtable launch, which kind of was more of what we'll call a relational spreadsheet I'll talk about in a minute. And then just in 2021, you had a new tool called Equals launched, which is kind of similar to Google Sheets in that it's a connected spreadsheet. So today we still see, Excel dominates the spreadsheet space, but what we're seeing is a lot more specialized software to help cover those areas that can't always be managed by a spreadsheet. So I like to break it out into kind of 4 categories here. You have your traditional spreadsheets, which VisiCalc was one, Excel, Lotus 123. Second one here, this should be relational spreadsheets. And what relational spreadsheets are those that have a database behind them. And Airtable is a good example, Grist, C-Table, where they kind of combine a little bit of database with a spreadsheet like Phil and a spreadsheet interface. Then you have what we call connected spreadsheets. And those are Google Sheets, Equals, Rows. They're all cloud-based, usually makes it a lot easier to connect different data. Obviously, you can do that in Excel with Power Query. But we kind of separate those. Now what we've seen is an explosion, which we'll talk about in a minute, of specialized software. That's where Runway comes in, Anaplan, many other planning tools that we can list. And those tend to be multi-dimensional planning tools. How many of us have ever worked in Excel and had that challenge where I got rows, I got grids, and I got different sheets, and that's it? And you're frustrated because you might have 6 dimensions. I might want to look at product, company, currency, whatever, legal entity. And it becomes really tough because you basically have rows, columns, and your different sheets. And so doing multiple dimensions is why we've seen the specialized software. And we'll talk about some of those examples here in a minute. But what I thought would be fun before we do that is to give you guys a view of some of the what the early software looked like. So here's a picture by Dan Bricklin, who created VisiCalc. He showed this in 2019. This is the earliest photo he has of the tool. I mean, you just look at that, the monochrome there. You see the numbering, how big the 10 is. You can see the columns and rows were there from the very beginning. But, you compare that to any tool today. Next, Microsoft launched Multiplan. You can see again, in this case, they labeled both columns and rows with numbers, which could get potentially really confusing. But you'll notice it goes down to 10, starts over again. And you can see all these different commands on there. There's no menu. Then in 1983, and I think this is where really the first planning tool came about, is TM1. And TM1, I didn't know this till I did this research. It stands for Table Manager 1. And if you're a complete nerd in this space, there's actually a video about the founding of TM1. It's like an hour-long video that's out there that tells the whole story of how TM1 came about and how they thought of being able to manage multiple dimensions. And that's where cubes came. And we started to see more and more tools find a way to allow us to handle large data sources, which spreadsheets really struggled with. This is where it kind of all started with TM1. Then in 1985, you can see here kind of a picture of Excel for the Mac. This is starting to look probably a lot more similar to what we have today. Still not quite there, but you can clearly see rows and columns, different size, a menu at the top. And then here is what Google Sheets looked like when it first launched. I mean, you look at Google Sheets today and much easier. This was a test one version. You click up here for a new spreadsheet, some basic links. Around the same time as Google Sheets came out, we had Anaplan launch. Anaplan is probably one of the most successful planning tools we've had in history. And, they are now owned by Thoma Bravo and really started to push the envelope on how to think about planning tools. So you can see that one. Today here we have Runway, 2024. You can see how the UI continues to change, but there's some things you'll notice. You'll still see a table format. When you look at that main versus aggressive scenario, you can still see a little bit of those rows and columns layout. That has stayed with us for hundreds of years. Regardless of what tool we look at, we often see some kind of spreadsheet input. Spreadsheets aren't going anywhere, but they are definitely changing. So what I want to point out is spreadsheets are great. I love spreadsheets. I use them all the time, and we'll talk traditional spreadsheets. I'm also a huge fan of planning tools. They each have their place. And these surveys really highlight it for me. I'm going to start with the one on the left. This was a survey done in 2022 that had created 3 groups. Was your plan or your budget great or good? Was it average or basically useless? No good. Scary enough, 16% of the all group said it was useless, which makes me wonder why we budget sometimes. But that's a separate webinar. Siqi's nodding his head in the background. You can't see him in the green room, but he's probably like, yeah, I wonder sometimes too. All right. So then we have driver-based planning. Didn't make much of a difference. But if the company was using a cloud-based tool, you saw a pretty big bump in improvement. Then next, which I love, if they're using AI and ML, they were much more likely to rate it a great or good plan, which what that tells us is technology helps us with planning. And we can see on the CFO technology priorities, 41%, and they could list multiple, listed their number one priority is FP&A for software technology, right? That's the area they're struggling. And that is why we have seen an explosion, which I'll show here in a minute, of tools. But before I do that, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but this is a comparison. At the end of the day, as I always tell people, there are some benefits to spreadsheets. Low cost, right? None of the planning tools can beat the cost of a spreadsheet. It's just, they're not able to do it. There's more training available. Resources are huge. And the agility. As I like to say, if you want unstructured data, which comes with its own challenges, chances of error, other things, spreadsheets are going to be more agile and flexible than something with the database. But that database is going to give you the integration, that scalability, security, version control, all those things that often end up happening in what I call Excel hell. And I think anyone who's done a large company on a spreadsheet knows what I'm talking about. When you try rolling it all up and numbers don't tie, links break, whatever it may be. So the spreadsheet has its place. The planning tool has its place and brings in a lot of benefit that gives you an enterprise scalable solution. And because of that, we've seen an explosion in FP&A software. If someone had told me when I started my business 2.5 years ago, I'd be contacted by a CEO almost every week asking me to demo a software, I would have looked at them like they were crazy because I didn't think there were that many different ways to plan. So if you look here, and the numbers will be even greater now, this is a little dated, but you look in the 1970s, it shows 2 companies today that have a planning tool, and those probably started with an ERP. So you had a couple there. Then in the 80s, you had your TM1, your S-Base. Others start to grow. You had a few in the 90s, 2000s that started to take off. Then in 2010, it grew again. Look at just the last 4 years since 2020. We've had roughly 50 tools, which means more than 1 tool a month is coming into this space, right? Really, which is quite crazy to me to think. And there are times I've had 4 or 5 CEOs reach out to me in a month saying, hey, I want you to see my tool. And there are times when I struggle to differentiate this market. What is the benefit of that tool over the spreadsheet? How is it different from the other planning tool? So where I want to start with Siqi here is I want to ask him a question about this software. As we've talked a little bit about the history, I want to understand why Runway? Why do we need another tool in this space? Obviously, there's a lot out there. So maybe you can answer that for us as we talked a little bit about the history. Let's get into a little bit about Runway.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was so looking forward to this presentation. I love the history of these tools. I am that kind of nerd who is into not just Lotus 123, but Lotus Improv. I think I was one of the first driver-based modeling tools. So why another thing? So my background is candidly not in finance, although we now do have great finance people running the company. In fact, some of our customer success team members actually used to be our customers, and they joined the team because they liked the product. So the inspiration behind Runway really came from, first, I've been running companies for a while, and I always felt there's this connection between the important work that the finance team does, reporting, forecasting, getting information from the different departments, and being strategic about where we're going. And the perception from the other departments is they get paperwork for finance. It's not clear what the finance team does and how they add value. They seem like bean counters. And that disconnection is so vast. And one of my hypotheses is that the reason why that exists is the tools aren't good enough for people to understand and digest the work that they do and how the company works. And so the more we thought about this problem, so a few inspirations led to why I thought this was a good idea. So the first thing is, you probably use great products. Like if you're in design, use Figma. If you're in product or business operations, you probably use something like Airtable or Notion. And everyone has an iPhone. And we have these amazing products today for knowledge work. And when you think about what you can do for business planning, I feel all of the tools are pretty difficult to use, pretty heavy, and fundamentally not accessible to people outside of finance. And I think that's really what is required. And this is not a new observation from Runway or my company. This idea that finance should be connected and finance should be strategic has been a marketing message for the last upwards of 10 years, as you know, Paul. And so when the curious thing, though, is when we talk to people in finance who use these tools, what we find is that 100% of the time, the actual forecasting and modeling and planning, forward-looking, is still done on Excel. And the outputs are sort of copy and pasted into these tools. And at that point, if you're paying like $100,000+ a year for one of these things, what is the point? And why is that still the case? And so when we really thought about the problem, this is the thing that I think is the main thing that we're focused on, the number one thing. So most existing tools understand the problem that finance should be more strategic. They're under more pressure than ever to be strategic partners in the rest of the company. And the way these tools solve that problem is by automating and saving time, integrating data, making it easy to do reporting, adding controls, and building better tools for just the finance org. And the thing that I think doesn't work about that, I think all of that is table stakes, is that if you really want to have strategic impact, you have to collaborate with the other parts of the company, right? The sales department, the product department, the engineering department. And in order for collaboration to happen, people need to have context. But you can share all of the models, all of the data, but none of it matters if the people on the other end don't know what they're looking at. And that's the real core of this problem, is that getting a spreadsheet, the problem with that is that the only person who actually understands how it works is the one person in the first place. So if we can create something that's truly immediately understandable to people outside of finance and inside of finance, we think we can crack that problem of actual strategic impact from the finance team. And that's really why Runway exists.
I appreciate the answer. And that leads me to another question.
Sure.
So how has Runway cracked that, or how is it different? What is it doing that is solving that problem that maybe is unique to Runway? Because, right, obviously there's lots of tools out there.
Yeah, this is, I've always hesitated to answer the question in this way, but the more I think about it, the more I think it's actually the right answer. The answer is design. And I know it sounds frou-frou, but I feel like design is actually still pretty undervalued. Like in a world where we have the iPhone, and iPhone works because it was just a better design phone, people look at design and hear that answer and think, well, okay, you can make it prettier. But I think design is at a very deep level about how things work, not how things look. And so this is not intended to be like a demo for Runway, but I can like briefly show you how it works in just like 30 seconds or so. But to tee it up, one of the key ideas that we thought very, very hard about is how do we bridge the gap between how a finance person and the other counterparts in the business think about their business in their head and what they're seeing on their screen. So what I mean by that is if you think about how a product person or a salesperson or a CEO or a finance person thinks about their business, it actually usually isn't in the form of a wall of numbers in their head. Actually, nobody thinks about it that way. The way people think about their business is in the form of a roadmap, a fundraising plan, a marketing plan, things that they will do in the future to move the core drivers of your business, right? That's what a product roadmap is. You make the product better so that users will use it more, or they convert better. Or an engineering roadmap might work on engineering optimizations to save on server costs, and that impacts the business in a certain way. And what you find is that you have all this context that lives in Notion and Google Docs, Slack, email, and it's really completely disconnected with the spreadsheet that finance model maintains. And so you have this like back and forth to reconcile the strategic plans that is in words with the numbers that drive the business. And so one of the things we worked really hard on is try to figure out how can we unify the two. And so we actually have an abstraction called plans. And what we found is that it really changes the way people run their businesses. So just like a quick 30-second demo, because you kind of have to see it for it to make sense. I don't know if this, oh, cool. So yeah, this is a live view of Runway, and I promise it won't take more than like 60 seconds. But you have your model into Runway and you build it very similar to the way you would build something like in Excel, right? So, in Excel, every cell has a formula. In Runway, we're a driver-based modeling tool. So we have human readable formulas like cash is cash last month minus burn, and Runway is cash divided by burn. And so you would build your logic, your model in a very similar way. But once you have your model in Runway, you can create these plans. And this is kind of a new thing. And so, if you look at a marketing plan, for example, you can imagine your head of marketing offloading the marketing plan from a Notion page. And we actually integrate with Jira for this purpose. And you can see what it does. This marketing plan affects 3 drivers. It says, we're going to increase marketing spend by $170K over the course of these 3 months. And in October, we expect to change our cost per lead by $410. And in September, we expect qualified leads to improve by 37%. And so I can click into this and you can see how it's changing, right? So this is how marketing spend is changing over time. And this is how cost per lead is changing. And this is how qualified leads is changing. And each of these things is the outcome of someone doing something in a marketing plan. So if you look at the same information in a spreadsheet view, you can see the marketing spend changing here. But why is it changing? Who's going to change them? That context is missing. And once you have your plans here, you can say, okay, what is the ROI of spending more on marketing? And typically you have to make a copy of your spreadsheet and to get that information. But in Runway, you can just click on it and we immediately show you the impact of that change, right? So this blue highlighted area shows you cash goes down, Runway goes down, but your IRR is going to go way up. Or you can take the marketing plan as a whole. You can see how that affects all of your KPIs. You can even just experiment with different levels of spend really quickly. So you might say, what happens if I spend more or less on marketing? And you can edit this number, or you can just drag it up and down, and you can see how all this stuff responds in real time. Or change the timing of your decisions, right? So you might say, what happens if I push back this marketing plan or move it ahead? And all of this will just work and respond in real time. And that's the idea. Similar to Airtable, if we can create better abstractions, we can help you think faster and better in a way that's more natural to you and is closer to how you actually think about the business.
Thank you for sharing that. When I tested Runway, plans are one of the things I found really useful. I like the way you've developed that. I think it's great to see, and as we continue to move forward, it's exciting to see how technology will continue to change. Right? If we look at the history, we think that first screen in 1979. Can't imagine using that today. You think what you just shown. Where are we heading with all this technology? I'm curious your take.
I think one of the stories of technology and why I really appreciated this presentation is I think the story of technology is fundamental story of communication. From the Sumerian clay tablet to the written word, right? You think about what makes humans, it's our ability to communicate, right? The invention of speech allowed us to coordinate people within earshot. So you have tribes. The invention of writing allowed us to communicate to people and our intent beyond earshot, and that's what allowed for the organization of civilizations, right? And then you have the Industrial Revolution, and you have the information technology revolution, where now you can coordinate across vast distances in real time. And spreadsheets and Excel, I think, is another great example of communication technology, where the projects we're working on, the business we're working on, become so complex that we can't do the calculations in our head anymore, or do it, on paper, right? Using punch cards. So we have great software to visualize this. And so, for me, the story of technology is as technology gets better through design and AI, what it allows us as humans to do is organize more and more complex, larger projects in a way that we can fit into our heads. And so, part of that is, for us at Runway, a lot of that is better design so that you can think more complicated thoughts in a more intuitive way. But obviously AI is a big helper here too. And our point of view on AI is pretty specific. I think a lot about this problem. And the majority of the way people interact with AI today is to treat it as a creature, right? It's like this external entity. So what I mean by that is the two major ways that people are familiar with AI today is one is a ChatGPT interface.
Mm-hmm.
And implicitly with a chat interface, what you're doing is you're talking with this other thing, right? It's independent of you. The other big trend in AI that is very hot right now is agents, right? And agents are basically, instead of waiting for you to have a conversation with the chat box, it'll just do things as almost a pseudo junior employee, whether that's, writing an email or writing some code or fixing some PRs, and it'll just do it. The LLMs, the large language models, aren't quite there yet for that to be quite useful or reliable yet. But those are the two ways in which most people interact with AI today. But when you look at what's actually the most economically productive use of AI in the real world today, is actually the GitHub Copilot, which is a very different experience. So that's a tool for engineers, and as they're writing code, it helps them write code faster. It'll autocomplete for them. And that is a use of AI that I think is going to be most helpful for all kinds of workflows, including finance. So it's less about like a chat window where you're like asking to do things. The problem with that is two things. One is it needs to know a lot about your company, and most of the tools don't. ChatGPT knows nothing about you or your context. And the second thing is you have to know what to ask. And I find that most people aren't quite familiar with all of the power that an LLM can do for you. And so what's much more interesting, and we call this ambient intelligence in Runway, is that as you are working, similar to a co-pilot, it can infer the context that you're working on and just help you complete the work that you're doing. So for example, and we don't even advertise it as AI, which is kind of interesting. But for example, when you're looking at any particular model, you can just open it up and we'll have a human English language, plain English explanation of how this formula works, how it's calculated, what it's used for. If you're looking at a BVA, right, you can see that there's a variance, but we can actually go in and just tell you as you mouse over it, the reason why you had a margin variance is because in Q1, this particular customer segment had a variation. And so these are the interfaces where you don't have to actually ask it a question. The thing about having it be an external entity is that you're trying to have something do the thinking for you. And we think AI is much more interesting as a tool to help you think.
Thank you. I really like that idea. The last part you said where it helps you think. How can it help you go beyond what you're thinking about? And I think at this point, we're going to move into Q&A, give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. I think, Brandon, you're going to host that for us, right?
Yeah, definitely happy to help. So just a note for everyone in the audience, if you do have a question, feel free to pop it in the Q&A panel or the chat, and we will definitely work to answer that. I see one in the chat from Ian, and Ian is asking, on what software was Runway built?
That's a good question. Runway was built on Runway, I suppose. It is a completely custom-built no-code platform built on the web with Go and TypeScript and a bunch of other technologies, including AI technologies. But what you saw in Runway very briefly, and if you want a full demo, you can go to runway.com/launch, where you can see a bit more about how it works. Nothing in Runway is hard-coded. So if you use Notion, what Runway basically is a version of Notion that we built in-house. It's not based on Notion in any way, but it looks kind of like Notion. That connects to all of your internal data sources, whether that's your general ledger, NetSuite, QuickBooks, your HR systems, Rippling. Notably, we're still the only finance platform in the world with a Rippling integration. Google Sheets, your data warehouses. You can write SQL there. And allows you to then do math and collaborate and plan with your team. And you can, write text and do all the normal things that you would expect.
Awesome. I don't see... Oh, there's one more from Stefan. Can I export Runway to Excel?
Yep, you can export Runway into Excel as well as CSV format. The one thing I want to be transparent about is we don't today export the formulas yet, and we're working on that. But you can easily get your outputs and your views into Excel.
As I told Siqi the other day, every software has to have 3 buttons. Okay, cancel, export to Excel.
That's true.
That's the baseline.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Excel is a really fantastic piece of software. I thought there was a few people who reacted with a laugh emoji when I said it's the best piece of software mankind has ever created. I mean that absolutely wholeheartedly. It is just the most incredible piece of software. It's exposed the power of thinking and software engineering to a population that aren't software engineers. Fundamentally, Excel and writing formulas is programming, and it's visual and it's so accessible. It's lovely. And sort of going back to this idea of helping you think, right? I think I think about that a lot because it connects to the question that Paul asked me about why Runway. And one of our beliefs is that what people do, whether it's in finance or as a CEO or in sales, is not just about reporting. It's not just about connecting your data and putting into a chart and reporting out, here's like the scenarios and where it's going to be. I think the most useful thing that people need to do is they have to think. And so Excel is a fantastic tool for thought. And where a heavy incumbent platform falls short is that it's not designed for you to be used as a tool for thought. It can be pretty difficult and rigid to change the structure of your model. If you need to think about a new scenario, a new way of working in your business, oftentimes you have to find an implementation specialist to redo your model. And tools for thought aren't like that. Tools for thought is very easy to pick up. It's very accessible. It's very fast. It matches the way you think. And the opportunity for us to improve upon that specific use case against Excel is that a lot of thinking you have to do with your existing data in your company. And so getting that data in is part of the problem. The complexity and dimensionality of the thinking that you have to do is another opportunity for us to improve upon Excel. And probably the biggest one is in a team, in a company, you have to think with other people. And so one of the really, really funny observations I have is, like, why doesn't everyone just share their model spreadsheet with everyone? And the answer is actually surprisingly subtle but obvious. It's that actually, because in even Google Sheets or Excel, all of the calculations is done on the front end, not on the server. So if you wanted everyone to see how the business works, but you wanted to hide the one column called salaries from everyone and encrypt it and lock it, you can't. It's literally like, it's not how it's architected, right? And so if you want to have a collaborative planning experience, you kind of have to use something else. So that's kind of the problem that we solve.
Awesome. Thank you, Siqi. I see a few questions coming into the Q&A panel, so I'm just going to pull them on stage as well so that we can all see them. This next one is from David. So David's asking, what is the most important problem that Runway solves? Is it easy? Is it the easy use of scenario modeling?
So it's complicated a little bit, but there are these table stakes reasons why a finance team chooses Runway, right? So, and then we have like differentiated reasons on top of it. So the table stakes reasons are, one, you have so much data across so many more data sources over time as your company gets larger. So you start with your QuickBooks and your general ledger, your NetSuite, then you add an HR system, then you add a data warehouse, then you add your CRM. And the amount of time it takes a finance team to actualize your model, which I'm sure you're familiar with, increases over time. So data integrations is a big one. The other thing is model complexity, the dimensionality of the model. You have new customer segments, new entities, new geographies, new departments, new product lines. And all of that becomes like very complicated very quickly, especially for, let's say, e-commerce company might have 1 million SKUs, and keeping that up to date becomes very challenging. The third thing is you have more people in your company. And with more people in your company, it means that you need to get information from more people so that you know where the business is going, where it is now. And you need to get information to people so that everyone is going and rowing in the same direction. And so we solve those three problems, but the most important thing that I think we solve better than anyone else is the third one. It's making this understandable to people outside of the finance team as well. And why is that important to the finance team? The reason why that's important to the finance team is when you look inside a company, the finance team obviously has a financial model, and that's sort of the main model in the company. But then when you talk to the sales team and the product team and the engineering team and the marketing team, all of those teams also have their own models. And none of them talk to each other. And so what we're trying to solve is imagine a world where a marketing person changes some part of their plan in terms of how much they're spending and what they're spending it on, or the product roadmap changes, and that affects like conversion rates or pricing or engagement. And that can flow directly, immediately into the margin and growth forecast of the finance team. That's the world that we should live in. And I think it's only made possible if you can build better tools for thought, where your marketing team and your engineering team reaches for that tool first to do their thinking.
Great. Thank you, Siqi. And the next one I see is from, apologies if I'm pronouncing this wrong, Abhishek is asking, what kind of ML model does Runway use?
So it depends on what we mean by machine learning. In the non-deep learning AI sense, we currently don't use any ML modeling. So the actual forecasting and modeling is done through Excel-like formulas. So, marketing spend leads to leads, which then leads to a conversion rate through ARR. So you would define your model however you like, very similar to your experience using Excel or any other spreadsheet modeling tool. For AI, we integrate with the enterprise API of OpenAI.
All right. And the next one is from Mason. Has there been any thought about creating a Runway product for family offices, private equity, venture capital to run models on different portfolio companies or to help them with the models? This would be incredibly helpful for value-add investors who have several companies they are helping with.
Yeah, so we created Runway to be a universal tool for business thinking. And so some of our customers, AngelList runs their business on Runway, Superhuman runs their business on Runway. As far as for PEVC, so one of our clients is K5, which is a PEVC firm, and one of their portfolio companies that runs their business on Runway is a company called 818 Tequila, which is a Kendall Jenner's tequila company. And so we have a case study out with them, and they're now deploying Runway across all of your portfolio companies. So that is something we already do and would very much love to continue to support.
Great question, Mason. The next one is from Iomid. Both philosophically and business-wise, why build a product to augment thought as opposed to workflows?
This is a wonderful question. The short answer is that workflow products exist, and they've been quite successful, right? And they've already exist, and I would classify everything from Anaplan out to the Pigment as fundamentally workflow products. Like you get your data into these products, and you create scenarios. You can create some forms and budgeting for people to fill in the blanks. But I think a tool for thought is something quite different. I think it feels a lot more like Excel. And so the reason why we think it's important to build a tool for thought is when you look at the opportunity in the space, the opportunity that we see is how can we truly connect the entire company into one platform where all of the different parts of the business, product, sales, engineering, and the way they think about their business, it's connected to the finance point of view. And that is a very clear need. And in fact, it is how everyone markets their product. But Paul would notice when you actually talk to the people who use them, that doesn't actually happen. And so that is the core question we ask ourselves. Why is it that everyone understands that this is a need, but like when you actually adopt and buy any of these products, you don't use it in that way. You still do your forecasting and thinking and modeling planning somewhere else. And we think the answer is, if you build a workflow tool, it's just fundamentally not designed for that purpose. Like the feeling of using something as good as Excel is fundamentally different than when you're using a tool designed to solve for workflows. And so that's our main bet as a company, is that while we need to do all of the basic workflow things, we won't achieve true holistic understanding across the entire your single pane of glass across all your departments without also building the best tool for thought.
Very thoughtful question, pun intended. The next question, what are some of the key risks that Runway faces as it continues to grow and innovate in the AI and creative technology space?
All of them. Startups are hard. I mean, we are actually a 4-year-old company, and with every company comes a lot of risk: competition risk, market risk, execution risk. I will say the biggest risk that we've been focused on in the past 4 years is like, can we even come up with something that will be differentiated enough for people inside of finance and outside of finance to be able to model and plan and understand our business better? And that's very much a design risk problem. And I think one of the bigger risks is, can we make these abstractions so accessible and simultaneously flexible that people up market and down market will take this and choose it as the first place that you go to think about the business. I think we made a lot of progress, and I think we're further along than any other company I could name probably in this space for that specific problem. other companies are probably ahead of us on other dimensions, but in terms of just like the accessibility and as a tool for thought, I'm like firmly convinced like we're probably in the lead on this one. And the question is like, will we maintain that lead? Because there's a lot to do and it's a very wide surface area type of product. So that is the usual risk, I think, with executing any new product in any space.
Our next question is from Matt. Appreciate it, Paul, for popping it in the panel. At what scale should a company begin to think about using a product like Runway?
Thanks for that question, Paul. So,
Thank Matt.
oh, is it Matt? Oh, great. Yeah. So, our typical ideal customer profile is you have at least a full-time finance person, meaning the pain of like and the complexity of modeling and finance is sufficient enough where you've invested like at least a full-time headcount in. Because before that, really, you should probably just be using Google Sheets or Excel because it's probably not that complicated. And it goes all the way up to 1,000, 2,000 employees, right? So, AngelList runs on Runway, Superhuman. We have Lambda also as a customer. And so, the ARR ranges from anywhere to like a few million up to hundreds of millions of ARR. But generally, if you're so small that you don't even need a full-time finance person, it's probably too early for something like Runway.
All right. And then we have one more. This is following up on the question regarding a tool for thought. So following up on that, do you believe in the age of abundant intelligence, the best products will be the products that augment thought for its particular use cases?
That's a subtle one. I think it depends, like what the age of abundant intelligence is and when it is. But I love this question a lot. So I think pre-AGI and pre-ASI, basically before godlike AI, where AI will be able to do everything that humans can do except 100 times smarter and better and faster. Before that happens, I think the answer is yes. The best use of AI will be to augment our own human intent. Post that, who knows? But we're talking about the singularity here, and every possible economic job will probably not exist, and new forms of economically valuable jobs will have to be created. But the short answer is yeah, until it gets to that point, humans are in the driver's seat, and we still have to understand things in order to know what to do and how to coordinate. And so up to that point, yes, products that augment thoughts are going to be more valuable.
All right. Well, it looks like that we don't have any additional questions or comments in the chat. So maybe last one as we wrap up today's session. Siqi, Paul, any closing thoughts or anything you'd like to leave the audience with?
I'll go first and leave Siqi last word there. I really enjoyed the questions around, building a tool around thought. I think that is important. Workflow is the easy thing to build around, right? It's like, okay, you got this problem, you do A, B, C to solve it. It's very process. But at the end of the day, the strategic side is about thought, about really thinking about how you're different. And it's exciting to see tools such as Runway helping solve that and others. And I'm excited to see how we move forward in that space. And excited not just for Runway, but how Excel continues to move forward with AI and spreadsheets in general. We're really at the beginning of an age where it's hard to predict where we'll be in 5-10 years. And that's exciting. Where 10-15 years ago, you could be like, okay, I think we'll kind of be here, and you could probably be pretty close. Right now, anyone who tells you that they can predict all that's going to happen in the next few years, I wouldn't buy it. And so it's just exciting. I'm excited for Runway. I'm excited for all the technology in this space and to see how they make our lives easier so we can be better thought leaders. We can be more strategic. And ultimately, we can better support the business, because that's really what it's about in finance, is better supporting the business and helping them make better decisions.
Yeah, love that. I'm actually, I love this one clip from one of our customers so much. He's a VP of finance person. So I'll just share this and then sign off so you can see it. Actually, I'm not sure the audio is going to come through. Let me know if you hear this. Can you hear this?
The most joy that I get at work is like in your software, right? Like I love being in your software, and I love being on the phone with our venture debt provider and them saying, oh, we need access to this, that, and the other, and I'm like, it's done. Like refresh, and like they've got it.
What I love to hear about that is like the word joy. One of my favorite adjectives, and probably the most frequent we get about users Runway, is that it's fun. And fun sounds like kind of extraneous, luxurious even. But I actually think it is a pretty critical component of having a good tool for thought. Because if you want to think well, like the purpose of thinking well is you have to make an impact and be creative. And we're creative when we're in flow, when we're happy, when the tools that we use give us joy. And so I think it's like, think about like using a tool that feels slow and you're sad. Like it's hard to be very creative and think very interesting thoughts that way. And so if we truly want to build that kind of tool, it has to feel joyful. People have to feel like it's fun. And so when people hear that, that's kind of how we know we're on the right track.
Awesome. Well, Siqi, Paul, thank you so much for today's content. Thank you so much to everyone that joined today's session. As I mentioned, this was our very first webinar. So if you are interested in joining our future ones, or if you have any feedback, please definitely don't hesitate to let us know. What I'm going to do afterwards is we're going to polish and send the recording over. And then if you're interested in learning more about Runway, I'm going to pull up this QR code, and all you have to do is pull out your phone and scan it. Thank you so much, all. Take care.